Hey guys, this is going to be my review on different types of needles, being bug pins, standards and double zeros, and hopefully be able to clear up a little bit of confusion as to when people mention bug pins and they're not actually using bug pins. So before we actually get into the needles, I'm just going to move them to one side and I'm just going to, in case people don't know, explain first of all what all the numbers are on needles. It's pretty basic stuff, but if you don't know, then this video probably won't make much sense to you. So, when we talk about needles, let's just say we're going to talk about a 9 magnum. So, if we're talking about a 9 magnum, that basically means we've got 9 needles on the end of a needle bar, and that's our 9 magnum. Now, if this was a standard magnum, on the back of the needle, somewhere in the packaging, it'd be wrote 1209M, which means it's 12 gauge needle, there's 9 needles on it, and the M is a magnum. Now, the first thing we're going to be looking at is this number here, the 12. We already know the 9 means how many needles, so that's self-explanatory, but it's the 12. Now, what the 12 means is, if we take one of these needles, just one of these, so say we're looking up close at the needle here, so we've got basically this going on. Let's say we've magnified the needle. 12 is the measurement of the diameter of the needle before it's ground down to a point. So it's the measurement of this here, and a 12 or a standard needle, 12 is like the standard in the industry. 12 are also known as 0.35 gauge. 0.35 is 0.35 millimeters. So that's the gauge of the needle. Now, when we talk about needle tapers, when you buy from your suppliers a needle taper, the taper is the distance from where the needle is at its thickest part to immediately after it starts being ground down to its point. Like that. So the taper is the distance between here and the point. Now, you can have short tapers, which would be about 2 mil. Or you can have long tapers, which can be 5 mil, 7 mil, even longer in some other cases, in extreme cases. The general consensus is the shorter the taper of the needle, the thicker the line's going to go in. So if you look at like a short taper being a soft pencil, so like a dull soft pencil, so you use a short taper needle, it'd be good for lining, putting thick lines in, you know, like one pass lines. And the longer the taper is, they're more for like sculpting, building up lines, you know, you're going to do a few more passes with them. Usually magnums come with quite a long taper, especially if you're building up shades and stuff like that. So hopefully you understand now what taper is. Taper is this bit, and what the gauge is, which is this bit. So when we talk about gauges of needles from the wholesales, they're usually in 12s, 10s and 8s, and these translate as 0.35s, 0.3s and 0.25s. So it depends on which manufacturer it is, which website you go to. It'll either sell needles as in like 12s, 10s or 8s, or it'll be listed as in 3.5s, 3s or 2.5s. And again, these measurements are this, the thickness of the needle, the diameter of it. So here's the confusion. When most people talk about what size needle they use, if someone says, hey, I use a 7 round liner, And that's all they say. They say, you know, you're watching someone on YouTube, and I don't know, they've done a kick-ass portrait or something like that, and whatever it is, and they say, someone asks, say, what needles do you use? And they'll say 7-round liner. If they just say 7-round liner, then we take it that they've used a standard 12 or 0.35, because in the industry that is standard. Here's the confusion. If they were using, say, a mag, and someone says what needle we're using, chances are they'll say, I use the Bugpin. Now, usually, from what I've found, this isn't a golden rule, but 9 times out of 10, what I found is when people refer to using a Bugpin on the internet, they're referring to using a 10. Now, when you go off to your supplier and you say, hey, I'm going to order some Bugpins, you go on the website and you look for Bugpins. Now, what I find on the suppliers, when they list Bugpins on the websites, the Bugpins are listed as 8s. So, here's the problem that a lot of people have. So they go away, they order themselves some Bugpins, they go on the suppliers and say, hey, they're Bugpins, so I'm going to order these. Because the guy on YouTube or wherever says, I'm using Bugpins. And the chances are he's not using these, he's using these 10s. Now 10s are also, here's more confusion, 10s are also referred to as 00s. 00 needles. Now we need to go back and watch the video again, but hopefully I've explained it right. So basically what I'm saying is, just to recap, when people say they're using Bugpins, the chances are they're using 00s. When you go to the wholesale website, Bugpins are usually these 8s. Just for added bit of information, Bugpins actually get the name from, you know, the display cabinets with the little flies on them, and they're displayed on a little pin. They're called Bugpins, and because these needles are so fine, that's where they get the name from, Bugpins. That's where the name comes about. So now we know what each needle is. So we've got our standard 12s, we've got our 00s, and we've got our Bugpins. So now we're going to look at the needles, and I'm going to give you my review on what I think, pros and cons for each one. So the standard 12, it's been used in the industry for years and years and years, and there's nothing wrong with them. They do the job. They're good for shading, they're good for colour packing, they're better for colour packing than they are for shading, in my opinion. I used to use these, I use these for years, never had problems with them. And, you know, if you're packing colour in, you know, you've got some solid black to go in or anything like that, these are the needles to do it, because there's quite a big gap. I'm trying to get this zoomed in there. There you go. Because there's quite a big gap between the needles, there's space between the needles, that gives the ink the opportunity to flow down the needles pretty freely, and what that results in is getting really good saturation. The only downside to these are, if there was a downside, healing time is a little bit longer than it would be if you were using a 00, because the needle's thicker, each of the needles are thicker, so there's more trauma to the skin. More trauma to the skin equals more healing time. So that's the only thing I would say about these. Two things, two cons. One, like I say, healing time's a bit longer than you'd get from a 00, and two, for shading, you know, you've got to do quite a bit of cross-hatching, I find, with these, if you want those really smooth blends of greys, or colour for that matter. You can achieve smooth blends with them, but it's just a little bit harder, in my opinion. So that's the standard 12 gauge needle on a Magnum. I'm going to move on to the Bugpin now for the review, the 8, and then I'll go to the middle one, and that'll come clear in a moment after I give this review on the Bugpin. Now the Bugpin, I find, you'd think in theory, let me just get close on these needles. You can see how close knit together they are. Now in theory, because these needles are so close together, what you get is a really smooth blend, if you want these really smooth shades. And what I find is, with these, the needles are almost too close together, and what that results in is the ink doesn't flow down the needles as freely as it should, like it does on the standard 12s. What it does on the 8s is you find yourself constantly dipping into the ink pot, constantly dipping in, and then you're trying to build up the shades, you're wiping off, and it puts in so little saturation. What you're trying to achieve is, with these really smooth blends, you're in fear of actually overworking the skin because you're going over it that many times. Just to get these shades built up. And I find using these 8s, these Bugpins, really slows my work down to a point where I've stopped using them altogether because I just can't get on with them. Again, tattooing is so individual. People sing the praises, some people won't. I personally, for my style of tattooing, I don't like these, and I've given them a fair crack of the whip, but I just can't get on with them. And then we come to the 10, because 10s, the 00s is, it's in between these two. And for me, these needles are absolutely amazing, because what you get is, with these needles, these 10s, again, this is like bang in between the Bugpin and the standard. Just try and get a close-up on that. There you go. What I find with these is there's enough gap between the needle for the ink to flow down. So there's enough gap between them to get the ink saturation. So when you're building up your blends, you're building up your greys or your colours or anything like that, what you find is the ink goes in, but because the needles are finer and they're closer together, you're not getting lines between your shades that you're building up. So it's going in straight as nice and smooth greys, but it's not taking forever to build them up either. So it's a happy medium between these two. And another thing with these 00s is the healing time is just reduced massively from using the 12s. So remember saying using the standards is quite traumatic to the skin, or it can be. These, again, because the needles are finer, you're causing less trauma to the skin, which is, it's the ultimate goal, to cause as less trauma as you can. And so I find with these healing time, I've had tattoos completely heal when they've been looked after within like 9-10 days, completely healed. And you just can't get that with a 12, I find. 12 take a little bit longer, could take up to like 2-3 weeks to heal, depending on what piece it is. But these, just healing time is just so much quicker. So for me, personally, I always use 00s now. For lining, I use the standard 12s because I just like the way they put the lines in. And if I'm doing script or anything like that, I'll tend to go to a 00 liner because it's just a little bit tighter. The ink's not as fast flowing, and you can just build up that script. But all in all, say for standard, traditional pieces, Sailor Jerry type stuff, I'll use a 12 for lining. Magnums, always use 00s for magnums. And the Bugpins I don't use at all. So I hope this helps some people out. I hope it's explained a few things off.